Good evening. I'm Mary Pat Higgins, the President and CEO of the Dallas Holocaust and Human Rights Museum. It is my pleasure to welcome you to tonight's program, Destroyer of Worlds, Hiroshima, Nagasaki, and the Atomic Bomb. I'd like to begin by thanking our co-presenting organization for this program, the Japan-America Society of Dallas-Fort Worth, which furthers mutual understanding and ongoing engagement between Japanese and Americans. We are tremendously grateful to partner with JAS for this event. I'd also like to give a special thank you to our community partners for this program, Jewish Federation of Greater Dallas, and the Legacy Senior Communities. Thank you so much for your support of the museum. And as always, I'd like to give a special welcome to our board members, museum members, second-generation survivors, and volunteers watching tonight, as well as anyone who is new to our programming at the museum. Your support helps us continue to offer programs like these. We gather virtually tonight to commemorate 80 years since the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, with a special presentation by historian and author M.G. Sheftall. But first, I would like to ask Becky Callahan, President of the Japan-America Society of Dallas-Fort Worth, to share a few words. Becky?
Thank you, Mary Pat. My name is Becky Callahan, and I serve as the president of the Japan-America Society of Dallas-Fort Worth. Thank you so much for joining us for tonight's deeply meaningful program, Destroyer of Worlds, Hiroshima, Nagasaki, and the Atomic Bomb. This isn't just a historically significant topic for me, it's actually a deeply personal one. I am half Japanese, and my mother was actually born on August 8th, 1950, just 5 years after the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, just one day between those two solemn anniversaries. She was born on Amami-Oshima in Kagoshima Prefecture and spent most of her childhood in Okinawa during the U.S. occupation. My grandmother, who is now 98 years old, raised her children during a significant hardship. Like many others in Japan, they struggled. Resources were scarce. People did their best to rebuild physically, emotionally, and economically during the long aftermath of war. She remembers those times vividly. Women walked barefoot in the streets. The trees were gone. They were burned. She did have one vivid memory of President Eisenhower, who had visited Okinawa, and her classmates were able to wave the small Japanese flags during the visit. And her story, like many other stories of that time, just remind us that history is not just something we study, it's something we live, we pass on, and through our memory and family. At the Japan-America Society, our mission is to strengthen those bonds of friendship and mutual understanding between people and of Japan and the United States. Part of that mission means taking the time to reflect honestly and thoughtfully upon the complex parts of our shared history. We are so honored to co-host tonight's program with the Dallas Holocaust Museum and Human Rights Museum, and we are grateful for the opportunity to engage. I would like to pass it back over to Mary Pat Higgins, and thank you again so much for tonight's presentation.
Becky, thank you so much for sharing your personal family story. We learn so much from individual stories, so I appreciate you sharing tonight. It's now my pleasure to introduce our speaker. M.G. Sheftall is a professor of modern Japanese cultural history and communication at Shizuoka University. In addition to his teaching duties, he has been a research fellow at the International Research Center for Japanese Studies in Kyoto, a visiting curator at World War II-related museums in Japan and the United States, and a technical consultant and commentator for numerous historical documentaries in both Western and Japanese media. His newest publication, Hiroshima, The Last Witnesses, and Nagasaki, The Last Witnesses, layer the stories of survivors in harrowing detail and give a minute-by-minute account of the lead-up, execution, and aftermath of these world-changing atomic bombing missions. We will leave time at the end of our program for questions. So if you have a question, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to type it out and submit it, and we will answer as many as we can. And now, it's my honor to invite Dr. Sheftall to begin his presentation.
Okay. Thank you, Mary Pat, for that kind introduction. Can everybody hear me? Can you give me a thumbs up? Okay, great. All right. As introduced, I'm MG Sheftall. I'd like to thank everyone for joining the program tonight on your end. It's morning here in Japan. I hope you'll find our time spent together worthwhile. So I've been living in Japan since 1987, and I've been working for Shizuoka University, my present employer, in one capacity or another for the past 33 years. Since April 2001, I've been a full-time faculty member here at Shizuoka, where the past 9 years I've been researching about atomic bomb survivors, or hibakusha, as they're called in Japanese. Please try to remember that word. I'll be dropping it a lot today. As a result of this research, I've written 2 books, Hiroshima, The Last Witnesses, which was published last September, and its Nagasaki companion volume, which was published yesterday in the United States. So last Friday, I had a bit of a thrill because I got a shout out from venerable conservative Washington Post columnist George Will, who remarked in his column, 2 atomic bombs probably reduced the war's quantity of violence and death. I don't know how atomic bombs reduce violence, but anyway, he says, he goes on to say, consider this when reading M.G. Sheftall's Hiroshima, The Last Witnesses. I like that he uses when here and not if. Anything to help the sales. Thank you, George. Okay, so what are my books about? The 2 volumes of what my publisher calls the Embers series are deep dive explorations of how the lives of a core cast of central characters were changed by the experience of the bombings, with these stories supported by detailed explanations of relevant cultural and historical background context for the benefit of readers who may be less familiar with such aspects of Japanese life. Okay, so let's just jump right into the nitty-gritty, so to speak, and travel with me in your imagination back to Hiroshima, Japan on the morning of August 6th, 1945. Okay. It's a busy Monday morning in this regional city and important Western Japan transportation hub. But traffic conditions on this morning are particularly congested because of extensive road work going on in the city's central business district. Specifically, this road work entailed clearing fire breaks along existing boulevards and avenues, right, widening those by tearing down privately owned houses to prevent conflagrations from one neighborhood to spread to another, in anticipation of the mass incendiary raid by Curtis LeMay's B-29s that everyone in the city had been expecting for the previous 9 months, or 6 months rather, excuse me. And in particular, the local army command, the military administration wanted key civilian and military administrative infrastructure in the central business district protected from fires. So areas around those facilities were also cleared. Now, the clearing of these fire breaks was quite arduous and labor-intensive work, and it involved literally tearing down privately owned wooden structures with ropes, and then clearing the rubble away and pushing it off to the sides of the road. A maximum effort had been called for this clearing to be done, and it would involve 20,000 civilian volunteers, quote unquote. Inclusive in that 20,000 volunteers were some 8,000 children, 12 to 13 years old, who represented basically the entire demographic of the city, who had been born between April 1st, 1932 and March 31st, 1933. Now, until this point in the war, all children in Japan, from university student down to junior high school second year, had been, or junior high school first year, had been mobilized to do war labor for the nation's war effort. So school was out for the extent of the war, for the duration, and no one knew when they would be going back. Now in Hiroshima, for the previous year, while the older children had been working in like munitions factories and airplane plants and things like that, the 12 and 13-year-old first-year students had been given kind of a pass and given easy duties, like working in their schools' truck farms, growing vegetables and things like that. But as the incendiary campaign of the Americans built up in intensity and was burning cities all across the Japanese archipelago, including every city around, but not on Hiroshima, the local authorities were getting particularly anxious and anticipated that something bad was coming, and soon. So they finally pressured the local civilian education bureaucrats to free up those first-year students, and they were put out into the central business district in the open with no cover whatsoever on the morning of August 6th. Okay, at 7:09 that morning, reports began coming in from air defense observatory posts to the east of the city that there was a bogey inbound and heading straight for Hiroshima at an altitude of approximately 10,000 meters, which is 10 kilometers or about 6 miles, 30,000 feet. Now, bombers had been flying overhead over Japan as a whole and over Hiroshima specifically for 10 months already by this point in the war. So the people in Hiroshima, which had not been touched by a single deliberately dropped American bomb to that point, were not too overly concerned when a single plane flew overhead and did a few circuits around the city. Still, there was a protocol in place for what to do when an enemy plane flew over. And the local, the air defense duty officer, who was in charge of the air defense command bunker in Hiroshima Castle, sounded what was known as a warning alert, not an air raid alert, but a warning alert, which suggested that women and children and old people seek shelter. Okay, so the sirens ordered the warning alert. These non-essential personnel, non-essential for war labor purposes, sought shelter, and about 30 minutes later, the all clear sounded. Everyone came back up and returned to their normal Monday morning activity. Okay, unbeknownst to them, at this time, another set of B-29s, 3 B-29s to be specific, were approaching the region from the southeast. And about 8 o'clock, 8:05, reports began coming in from air defense observers here that two B-29s were taking a westerly turn, and again headed towards Hiroshima. Right, there was a third airplane in the strike force, a photography plane, which was shadowing the bomb plane and the scientific equipment plane, and paralleling it here, flying over the water at a distance of about 20 kilometers from Hiroshima to take pictures of the mushroom cloud, the anticipated mushroom cloud, assuming the bomb wasn't a dud, of course. Okay, so again, the reports are coming in. The telephone switchboards in the air defense bunker are lighting up. More planes headed your way. Unfortunately, for Hiroshima, the duty officer in the bunker, the only person who was authorized to order air raid sirens to be sounded in the city, was out of the bunker at this time. He was discussing something with colleagues in the nearby divisional headquarters. So all of these calls are coming, heads up, more planes headed your way. These are coming in, but the personnel in the command bunker can't do anything about it, except to call an alert to like air bases and air defense artillery in the region. But critically, no word can go out to the civilian population, right? So everyone on the street, nobody knows what's headed their way, and they go about their business. Okay. At 8:14 a.m., right? What had been a high and far away droning sound of airplane engines at high altitude, again, a sound that Hiroshimans were quite used to by this point, and especially in daytime, were not particularly anxious about, because they knew that if one of the big incendiary raids was finally going to happen on their city, it would happen at night, right? So no one paid much mind to this until about 8:14 and 30 seconds, they heard a sound they were not accustomed to, which was these two B-29s doing a very violently maneuvered U-turn and running away from the area as quickly as possible. Now, by the time the sound of that throttling up of the engines reached the ground, 10,000 meters below, right, those planes had actually gone into those U-turns 30 seconds later. So it took 30 seconds for the sound to reach the ground. Right? Also, several objects which had been dropped by those airplanes at the moment before they went into those U-turns had also been falling for 30 seconds by the time people heard the sound change and looked up to see what was happening. Right? Now, people with sharp eyes would have seen three small white parachutes trailing from one of the B-29s. These were scientific instruments dropped to measure the force of the blast, etc. But almost nobody saw a cylindrical sarcophagus-shaped object fall from the second plane. And 15 seconds later, this object detonated at an altitude of approximately 650 meters, about 1,800 feet over dead center mass, the most densely populated area of Hiroshima City. So within seconds, a radius of the city, a circular area of the city centered on ground zero, out to a radius of about 2 kilometers in all directions, was flattened by the shock wave of the explosion and ignited by thermal rays released from the critical reaction, the chain reaction that had happened in the core of the nuclear core of the bomb. And within this area, only about 1% of the people who were there ended up surviving the experience. And those 1% were people who, just through some like freak luck, had happened to be behind there were several concrete walls between them and the fireball when that occurred, or they'd been in the basement of a substantial building like a bank or a department store or something like that. But anyone who'd been in an average person's like Japanese wooden house was killed within this radius. Right? Okay, 3 days later, another atomic bomb, and this time a more powerful plutonium device was dropped on Nagasaki. Okay. Again, there were no sirens in the cities, although some people heard a warning over the radio, a radio broadcast from another nearby city. Okay, so now originally Nagasaki was not supposed to have been bombed that morning. Right? The Imperial Japanese Army arsenal city of Kokura, which is up here in the northern tip of Kyushu, was the original primary target for the second mission, the August 9th atomic bombing mission. Now, as with the Hiroshima raid, the Kokura mission, the orders specified that the bombardier on the bomb plane, on the strike plane, had to have visual confirmation through his Norden bomb site of the designated aiming point on the ground. Okay. Now, when the Second Strike Force began their bomb run, they did so to approach the city and find that it was clouded over. Okay. It was clouded over by humidity, by morning humidity. Japan's extremely humid in the summer, probably a lot like Dallas in that respect. And also an air raid, a conventional air raid the day before in a nearby city was wafting smoke over the city was still smoldering from that incendiary attack. So the smoke from that covered up, put a sheet of haze over the city of Kokura that prevented the bombardier from seeing his visual, making visual confirmation of the aiming point. So the strike force made several circuits around the city, trying to approach from different angles. All the while burning up precious aviation fuel. Finally, the commander of the mission, Major Charles Sweeney, ordered them to proceed to the day's secondary target, which was Nagasaki. Okay. So after traversing northern Kyushu and then taking another perpendicular turn to throw off the local air defense array. This is standard procedure for an ingress into an enemy area, right? They approached Nagasaki at 11:01, okay, only to find again that this designated aiming point, which was supposed to be right here in the most densely populated part of Nagasaki, was the visibility was poor, and the bombardier could not identify the aiming point in the ground. Now, what happened next in the following seconds on the flight deck of the bomb plane is open to conjecture. Excuse me. There are several theories, some of them contradictory, including contradictory testimony. I don't have time to go into all of that today, but I do cover it in my book. Anyway, what happened was that the bomb ended up being dropped not here in the center of the city, which, had it been, would have resulted in casualties probably higher than that of Hiroshima. Right? But instead, it exploded 3 kilometers to the northeast in an industrial suburb of the city known as Urakami. And as with the Hiroshima bomb, again, the TNT, the dynamite equivalent of 20,000 tons of explosive power, wiped out a 2-kilometer radius, what I call a zone of total destruction, centered on ground zero, with an equivalent survival rate of people who happened to be within this zone at the time of the detonation. Okay, so we've talked about numbers, we've talked about explosive yields and technical details. Let's move the conversation here onto the topic of what this does to a human body, right? So give our participants tonight a little heads up here. For the next few minutes, there are going to be some rather difficult to look at images coming up, and also some of the things I'm going to be talking about. So please be forewarned about that. Now, I'm a baby boomer, a tail end baby boomer, born in 1962, right before the Cuban Missile Crisis. And growing up in Cold War era New York City, we went through the classic stereotypical duck and cover type of air raid training drills once a year, although we didn't go under the tables like you often see in documentaries. Instead we would go out in the hallway and crouch down on the floor. And I remember one of our more enlightened teachers, after one of these drills, telling us, well, we're in Manhattan. If the war with the Soviet Union happens, we're going to be on the right at the top of the target list, and certainly one of nuclear bombs are going to fall on us. It's too bad that we're all going to die, but don't worry about it because we're all going to be vaporized. Right? That was the magic word that the teacher used, with the insinuation being that it happened so quickly that we wouldn't have time to experience any pain. We're just like, here, one millisecond, gone the next, poof, gone, like a magician had waved a wand, presto changeo. Right? And on those rare occasions when our greatest generation teachers and parents and uncles and whatnot brought Hiroshima and Nagasaki up in the context of conversation about what they did in the war, etc., the word vaporized was also used to refer to the fate of the people in those atomic bomb cities. And I suppose that as Americans, we took some comfort in the idea that the approximately 200,000 people combined victims in both cities had not felt any pain because they'd been, again, quote unquote, vaporized. Now, one of the most sobering things that I found in the early stages of my research was when I talked to a medical doctor in Nagasaki who was a specialist in these in nuclear medicine, and also himself a hibakusha, a survivor at the age of as a 2-year-old baby of the Nagasaki bombing. And he told me that the vaporized thing was just it was a myth. It wasn't true. And he explained why. At the moment of detonation of both of these bombs, two vectors of immediate destruction were released, and they're traveling at two different speeds, right? So this disparity in the speeds is key to what I'm going to talk about next, right? So the first and the faster moved at light speed. This is electromagnetic radiation released as a consequence of the critical the chain reaction that had just occurred in the nuclear core of the weapon. Right? And the second vector, moving at a briefly supersonic speed, was blast force, a consequence of the superheated and hyper pressurized sphere of air, of actual atmosphere around the chain reacting nuclear core, that in effect turned into a gigantic sun lamp, right? Pumping out all of this electromagnetic radiation, and also pushing out the superheated air away from ground zero. Okay. So this irradiated the light speed destruction, irradiated everything and set everything on fire. This blast force knocked everything down and turned all the wooden structures into splinters, into kindling wood, basically, which was ignited by the fireball of the explosion. Okay, so on the ground, for approximately 8 seconds, while this 300-meter diameter sphere of superheated air, basically a second sun, fall into Earth, hanging over the target area, about 500 meters up. This fireball, while it lasted, it bathed the surface of everything within that aforementioned light orange 2-kilometer radius zone of total destruction at temperatures of 3,000 to 4,000 degrees centigrade, again for the duration of its existence before it was pushed up by thermals from the ground to be sucked up into the mushroom cloud, that iconic symbol of nuclear holocaust that we all know. Now, just to give you an idea of how hot 3,000 to 4,000 degrees centigrade is, steel melts at half of that temperature. Okay. So if you were unlucky enough to be caught out in the open without anything in a line of sight between you and the fireball at whatever distance away from you, you're in a very bad spot. Okay. So let's take a hypothetical case of someone standing outdoors, let's say 2 kilometers or 1.5 kilometers away, a mile away, and again in direct unobstructed line of sight from fireball. Okay, at the instant of the explosion, and some of you will no doubt recognize Sarah Connor here from the famous nuclear nightmare sequence of Terminator 2, which is actually widely regarded in atom bomb studies as being one of the most visually accurate depictions of such a catastrophe ever captured on film. So anyway, at the instant of the explosion, the electromagnetic energy expressed here as visible flash and thermal rays, and also gamma rays and neutrons freed up by the chain reaction, reach our unlucky victim at the speed of light. And as living creatures on planet Earth, we are basically creatures of water and carbon. When the 3,000 to 4,000 degrees heat, which is like twice the heat of a blowtorch for cutting steel, right? When that hits the person's skin, the water near the surface of the skin evaporates within a second or so, leaving behind the carbon, which is perfect fuel for combustion, which is exactly what ensues. The person begins burning alive, with the horrific possibility that they were aware of what was going on while this is happening. Okay. So in the time lag between the light speed heat and the other radiation destruction reaching the person, and the blast force coming up from behind at the speed of sound or slightly above, the person has to endure this unimaginable agony until finally the blast force hits them and puts them out of their misery. Now, I've been, as introduced, I've been talking to Hibakusha, interviewing them for 9 years now. And so many times I heard from them the idea that the people who died like this, right? So if you had to die from the bombs, this was the best way to go because it was quick. Right? It was horrific, obviously, but it only lasted for seconds. Right? As they said, a much worse way to die would be trapped by flames, buried under the rubble. Right? And actually, the majority of Hiroshima and Nagasaki casualties were due to just to fire, not to being spontaneously combusted themselves by the fireball, but rather being trapped in the wooden wreckage of the city, which was ignited by the fireball. Okay. And there's, of course, a third vector of destruction, which I'm mentioning here for the first time, which is radiation. Okay. So there were two kinds of radiation that were a consequence of the chain reactions of those two bombs. One was direct radiation, or what they call instant radiation, which was released as named at the instant of the chain reaction. This shot out in all directions from the fireball, and people exposed to that direct radiation, that instant radiation, the DNA in their cells was corrupted, right? Because of actual physical impact of things like gamma rays and extremely powerful X-rays and neutrons actually hitting the DNA and breaking parts of it off, right? And then later, when fallout fell over the city after the dissipation of the mushroom cloud, primarily in the form of rain, that was another way in which people's DNA was exposed to radiation and damaged, right? So everybody, I'm sure that almost everyone listening right now has heard of DNA, and you know that it's something that's necessary for living beings to create progeny, right? To in short, to make babies, to make the next generation of living organisms. But more germane to this situation, we also need DNA, right? So the cells in our bodies are always constantly undergoing a life, death, and rebirth process, right? We're sort of like renewable, right? We're made of trillions of renewable cells, right? But in order for the cells to renew themselves, they need the instructions in the DNA to be reborn, right? To be recreated. If this is corrupted, it just becomes like bad software. It doesn't work. When a cell dies, it can't replace itself. So what this means for the host organism is that it decomposes while the person is still conscious and alive. Right? This is a shot from the HBO Chernobyl series, highly recommended, by the way. And according to my Hibakusha informants, all of whom spent weeks and months after the bombing taking care of people like this, either family members, school classmates, work colleagues, or neighbors. All of them reported that this was absolutely the worst way to go. The suffering was just unimaginable and prolonged. And then the survivors, even the people who were not killed by this this acute radiation syndrome, which made them lose their hair and had their their teeth falling out and whatnot, they all started getting cancers around middle-aged, and the ones that are still alive now in their 90s have been fighting the bomb-related cancers, things like leukemia and gastrointestinal tract cancers and all, basically for the past half century. All right, so the final toll here, 80,000 people were dead in Hiroshima within 24 hours of the bombing. Maybe 20%, 10 to 20% of those were the ones who got directly incinerated by the fireball. The others mostly died in the fires or from some consequence of the blast force. By the end of 1945, 140,000 were dead in Hiroshima, with the extra 60,000 people primarily being these people, right? Nagasaki, where the bomb again exploded outside of the densely populated city center, 45,000 were dead within 24 hours of the explosion, and another 29,000 would be dead again, mostly from acute radiation syndrome by the end of the year. So, why and how did I write my Hiroshima and Nagasaki books? Right? It started with a journey. Excuse me. In this case, my coming to Japan in 1987, a couple of years after university, to teach English. And in those pre-internet and no no smartphone days, you couldn't just open up your translator app and negotiate navigate your way around the different cultural environment that you happen to be visiting. You had to do it by pen and paper, the old-fashioned way. It was hard. Luckily, I had a lot of free time, and I used most of this to study Japanese as quickly as I could. When I began to become conversant and fairly literate in the language, and began hearing what people around me were saying, it dawned on me how many people then still had very distinct and clear memories of the war, if not of actual combat, at least of American planes flying over every night and occasionally dropping incendiary devices on their homes. So coming in 1987, right, any Japanese person that I encountered who was basically 50 years or older had distinct memories, and in many cases, rather extreme resentments against America that were usually tended to be expressed when alcohol was involved. To make this rant a bit shorter, this sparked in me an interest, which has turned out to be lifelong, in the effect of the war on Japanese culture, and as a result on Japanese psychology, and also an interest in how the war is remembered in public discourse here in Japan. So after I got my first full-time university job in 2001 here at my present employer, and I had research funding for the first time in my life, I could finally indulge this interest professionally. And my first big research project was to contact a veterans association of kamikaze survivors, right? And I know that sounds like an oxymoron, and there was even a Curb Your Enthusiasm episode where that was the joke in the story arc. But obviously this men did not fly their kamikaze missions and crash into Allied ships, but their comrades did. The comrades who were in the same unit with them, specialized kamikaze units, they'd all undergone the same training together, they'd all been indoctrinated with the same ideology, and they had all made the personal and internal decision that they were going to expend their own lives in carrying out their mission. So these fellows were saved, only literally saved by the bell, with the bell in this case being the Emperor's surrender broadcast on August 15th, 1945. This resulted in my first big book, Blossoms in the Wind, Human Legacies of the Kamikaze, which was reprinted 2 years ago. Please read that if you can. All right, so the bomb interest came. Now, obviously, being interested in war memory and military history and living in Japan for 30 years, the bomb was always on my mind, and it was frequently brought back to my attention by my cultural hosts whenever I tended to forget about it. But I was too afraid of the possible political and professional consequence for me of going into that as a research specialty. However, in May 2016, when I heard the news that Obama was coming to visit Hiroshima 2 weeks later, I knew that this was something that I had to go and try to see. Right now, I wasn't at this point. I wasn't I wasn't thinking of doing a big atomic bomb research project or interviewing survivors or anything like that. I was interested in it more as a war memory specialist because I wanted to see how the city was going to respond to the first sitting American president visiting to participate in a ceremony at the Peace Park in the center of the city. Right? So I was lucky enough to get a hotel. They were booked solid. I got a cancellation and I was able to go. I arrived the night before, and as people do when they visit Hiroshima, it was my third visit to the city at the time, but my first in a professional capacity. I visited Peace Park, and I saw a long line of tourists waiting online to pay their respects at the Children's Peace Monument, which, as the name suggests, is dedicated to the children, and primarily those 8,000 junior high school students that I mentioned earlier that were killed by the bomb. When my turn came up, and I grabbed the chain on the bell, which you may see here, to ring it and do the Japanese Shinto shrine praying gestures. When I touched the chain for the bell, I felt something like almost like electricity flow through me. And I don't, I'm not a new age spiritualist kind of person here, but I think something spoke to me in that moment. And for a few seconds, I imagined myself as the parent of one of those dead kids going to the unveiling ceremony for this memorial 15 years later, 15 years after the bombing, and imagining what they might have felt in that moment. And and I felt like a ball of like a softball of molten lead just come up from the center of my being, and it came out in like an animal like groan, and I just burst out into tears. um and looking back on that, I think what it was I had been living in Japan already for 30 years by that point, and the legacy of the bombings was always something that for me I felt sort of like in the air. And as I said before, I was occasionally challenged about it by Japanese people, and I'd been kind of defensive about it, and I'd never allowed myself until that moment to to contemplate the tragedy, I mean, of all those people, and particularly all those children being killed. So it was cathartic, and it also led me to it gave me sort of marching orders uh, to take up the research project that I've been doing for the past 9 years. Right. So I got online, I looked up hibakusha, and I was very this is hibakusha in Japanese, and I was very, very lucky to meet a woman, a Hiroshima survivor herself, um, who agreed to meet me for an interview. Now, as you could see from her birth year, right, she was not supposed to have lived long enough to look like this someday, right? She woke up on the morning of August 6th with a stomach ache. Her mother made her stay home instead of going to the fire breaks work in the central business district, and she survived as a result, while all of her classmates and her homeroom teacher were killed. After the war, she got out of Hiroshima, got as far away from it as she could, and she pushed it out of her mind. She went to university in Tokyo, became a big journalist, but the survivor's guilt was there. It came up, as these things do. Having experienced myself midlife crisis around her early 50s, she decided to go back to the city to face her demons, so to speak. She took a couple of years off, and she visited the families of every one of her surviving family members of every one of her classmates and homeroom teacher who had been killed by the bomb. She wrote this amazing book about that experience and also her own August 6th memories. And this book has been in print for 40 years now, of critical importance to me, to my career. She obviously took a shine to me. She determined that I was sincere and that I knew what I was talking about. And she introduced me to the Nihon Hidankyo. Now, the Nihon Hidankyo is, you may have heard of them because they won the Nobel Peace Prize last year, right? But 9 years ago, when she introduced me to this group, they weren't quite as famous then, and they were happy to meet me and give me their time, and critically to introduce me to hibakusha who are willing to talk to an American like me about their experiences. And I ended up interviewing 51 Hiroshima and Nagasaki survivors, formally, meaning like three or more hours, in many cases, multiple sessions, and having all of these interviews recorded and transcribed later. And I met not only Japanese, but also Korean and Chinese hibakusha who had been in those cities at the time of bombing because of the circumstances of the Japanese Empire at the time. Okay, so when COVID-19 happened, that kind of put a stop to my interview field work. I finally sat down and started writing. And sorry, I have to skip over some stuff here. Right, I was so overwhelmed, not only emotionally, but also by the sheer volume of stuff that I had to work through and try to figure out what was going to go into the books and what wasn't. I had to learn the history of the cities. I had to learn the history of the American military operations. I had to teach myself nuclear physics, nuclear medicine, how to build an atomic bomb. Many times I just felt too overwhelmed and I contemplated giving up. But whenever I did, I thought back to the hibakusha who had entrusted me with their stories. And that gave me the sort of the energy to keep going and the inspiration to keep going. So I'll forever be in their debt for that, and I hope that I've done their stories justice, the justice that they deserve. All right, so thank you for your kind attention today. Sorry to go a little bit over time. It always happens.
MG, thank you so much for persevering. I know this
Thank
was
you.
incredibly difficult history, but it's important for us to all learn and know, and we appreciate it. Let's try to, we have a number of questions. Let's try to go through them fairly quickly because I'd like to, and with the audience, if you would give us permission to go 10 minutes over, we'd be grateful so we can get some of these answered. So this is, sort of more academic, but do you know, you said the bombs were different. The first was uranium and the second was plutonium.
Right.
Do you know why they were different or?
Yes. So 5 years before this, 6 years before, 1939, when the uranium atom was first split by German physicists, every nuclear physicist in the world at that moment knew that a bomb was possible, right? But at the time, uranium was the only substance that had been identified that could undergo what's called a chain reaction, right? A fission, Fissision. Now, we are probably here talking right now. We exist in the sense because it was so damnably difficult to extract fissionable uranium from the uranium ore, right? America spent $2 billion, $1945 on the Manhattan Project to build atomic weapons. Over half of that was spent on uranium extraction, which after 3 years of dedicated like Apollo project level intensity and dedication, only produced enough uranium for one bomb, and that was the bomb that was dropped on Hiroshima, right?
Wow.
If this had been easier to do, right, World War II might have ended up being a nuclear war with both sides having these bombs, and as I said, we wouldn't be here. Now, thankfully or not, fortunately or not, depending on one's perspective and national loyalties, I suppose. Parallel with the uranium extraction work, they also discovered that a man-made substance known as plutonium was also fissionable, and the Manhattan Project took a huge gamble of building nuclear reactors in the high desert of Washington State in a place called Hanford to build to create plutonium, which is a byproduct of a nuclear power plant, by the way, today, right? Looked at as a waste product now. So that's why the second bomb was the plutonium bomb, and every nuclear bomb since then that's been exploded involves plutonium at some point of the detonation process. Okay, I hope that
Okay,
answers
thank you. Yes, this question, what is your view of John Hershey's book, Hiroshima?
He's the godfather. He's the man. He's the one that was boots on the ground first. When the city was literally still ashes and you could smell the bodies everywhere. So
Important.
yeah. So in a way, I look at the books that I've written as the books I wanted to read, the books I wanted to read about the bombings that I hadn't been able to find at that point. if Hersey had been had been able to speak Japanese and hadn't had to work through interpreters whose interpreting I think was often imprecise, and if he had more knowledge about Japanese culture and history, I think he probably would have written a book like the books that I've written. But still, I have to acknowledge his work, his incredible work and courage in writing what he did. A short but very powerful book, which briefly in the early post-war period, created quite a bit of soul searching in America, which we seem to have largely forgotten now, right? We think that the narrative that the bombs saved all of these lives, American and Japanese, and therefore are this no moral
Necessary evil,
right?
yeah.
Yeah, the necessary
Yeah.
that that was not always the dominant or approved narrative of the bombs. There was, as I said, quite a bit of soul searching, especially among American religious groups whose financial contributions went far in early efforts to rebuild the two cities, especially Nagasaki, because of its historical Catholic connection, which is something I go into in detail in the book.
Let's see, were you able to access the material of the United Nations Scientific Committee on Atomic Radiation? Is that one of the sources you used?
Yes, that and I think I guess my most important two primary sources were the United States Strategic Bombing Survey, which was conducted in the early post-war months, with particular emphasis on what bombing had done to Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and also to the official municipal records of the bombings collected by Hiroshima and Nagasaki in the 1970s and compiled in authoritative encyclopedic multi-volume sets that are unfortunately are still only available in Japanese, but thankfully I'm able to read that. So yeah.
How accurate was the depiction of the atomic bomb development in the movie Oppenheimer?
Oh, I thought it was reasonable. Uh, the director Christopher Nolan was limited by not wanting to put audiences to sleep with too much science. But I think he did a pretty good job of capturing, if not the details, the drama of that, and them not knowing, like right up until the moment that the Trinity bomb was exploded in New Mexico, not knowing if what they had spent all these billions of dollars on and years of effort on was actually going to work, or if it was going to work and ignite the atmosphere and destroy the earth.
Everyone.
Yeah. Sorry, General Groves. I can't say that the possibility is absolute zero, right? That was a great scene.
Dramatic. It was a great movie. This question is about the woman that you spoke of, whose classmates and teachers died in the bombing. Is her book translated into English? Do you know?
Unfortunately, no. But it was another one of my very important sources for the Hiroshima book. I would like to translate that book someday. I really think it deserves translation. Although right now, this is something that always comes up when people ask me, well, why didn't you write this in Japanese? Or why aren't there more books by Japanese people written published in English about this? There are thousands of wonderful and fantastic books that have been written in Japanese by Japanese people, including survivors, about Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But even if you know the Japanese, they don't explain why are the Japanese doing this in that situation? Why are they saying this instead of that in that situation? They don't have to say it because their audience, their readership are all Japanese with them. They share the same cultural schema, right? They don't need to go into the details. Now, to get the non-Japanese reader on board with what's happening, you have to explain all that background context, right?
Mm.
So that's where someone like me can come in, where I have the knowledge and I know, and I can explain it. And that's probably one of the reasons why both of the books are like 500 pages instead of
Well,
a
that would be a
nice.
good next project for you.
Yeah, well, I have definitely have enough material for another book or
Yes.
two.
Wow.
Yeah.
Have you had an opportunity to ask any hibakusha more recently what their opinion is about government leaders talking more about nuclear weapons these days? And what do you
Yes.
think of this
Right.
normalization of nuclear weaponry?
Yeah. Okay. There are a few very
Yeah,
pertinent
it's
points in there. Um, the Nobel Peace Prize last year was a big shot in the arm for them. They were very proud of that. They were thrilled to get that exposure, and to put nuclear weapons back in public consciousness. But they're also very concerned to the point of despondency over the eagerness of other countries at the present to nuke up, right? So every time another nuclear power, a new nuclear power is added to the slowly growing community of nuclear armed nations, that ramps up the possibility that there'll be an accident or a misinterpreted message or something that will result in a nuclear exchange, which would then, right,
Right.
expand into something that would that potentially destroy human civilization. So,
Very frightening.
yeah.
This another kind of more technical question. How long did the bomb sites remain radioactive? And is there still radioactivity present in Hiroshima or Nagasaki?
Okay, so in order to be recognized as a hibakusha and eligible for public assistance from the Japanese government, you have to have been in the area at the moment of detonation or within 2 weeks. Okay.
Oh,
So the background radiation, any background radiation that could be harmful to human health had pretty much dissipated after 2 weeks. Right?
okay.
Also, a typhoon blew through the Hiroshima area about a month after the bombing, and it basically scoured all of the topsoil of the city and blew it out to sea, and that almost completely eliminated the fallout radiation.
Wow.
Now that typhoon had not touched Nagasaki, and today there are some areas in the northern part of the city where a lot of so the nuclear cores in those bombs did not undergo complete E equals MC squared conversion to energy. Only about 1% of them of that
Oh,
material was, so the
wow.
rest of it was
Oh my
blown out
goodness.
in a cloud of bad stuff, right?
Mhm.
And in the case of Nagasaki, a lot of that plutonium fell out of the mushroom cloud and down into a valley called Nishiyama
Mm.
in Nagasaki. And I mean, it's not, you don't need to wear like a radiation suit or anything when you go there. And it's all occupied with houses and apartment buildings and whatnot. But whenever they have to, if they have to dig down into the ground to build like a multi-story for a foundation for a big building, they have
Mhm.
to, everyone in the neighborhood has to put like plastic over their windows, and they can't open them for the duration of the excavation because
Oh,
there are
goodness.
minute amounts of the stuff comes up, and the guys doing the digging do have to wear the radiation suits when they're doing that.
Wow.
But people in Nagasaki don't talk about that very much, I guess, for obvious real estate property value concerns.
Um, a quick comment, not really a question, but one of our viewers says her mother was US born Kibe Nisei, was 11 years old and lived about a mile from the city center. A mountain range protected them from the blast. She shared some details of the day with with her daughter and said she is still healthy at 91 years old.
Wow.
And this viewer really appreciates you keeping the memory of this
Thank you.
history alive. Thank
Now,
you.
I would assume from that description that she's talking about a neighborhood called Dambara. Does that ring a bell for the person who asked that question? Because there was
Well,
only
maybe.
one, there was only one place in Hiroshima that was protected from the blast in the way that she describes, and that was a neighborhood called Dambara, which was sort of in the shadow of the lee side relative to the ground zero, the lee side of a small but steep hill called Hijiyama. So Hijiyama and Dambara, please ask your
Okay.
grandmother.
She's saying she'll ask her mom and asking, is it Danbara?
Exactly.
Yes. Okay. Fabulous.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. Two quick questions, and then we have to wrap up. That we could go on for so much longer.
Yes.
What annual ceremonies happen in Hiroshima and Nagasaki to remember
Big,
and
very,
commemorate?
very, very big productions. They're broadcast live on national TV, and they are in both of them are attended by the Prime Minister every year.
Oh, every year.
He'll come down from Tokyo for the Hiroshima one. He'll sit there for the ceremony. He'll say his kind of like he says basically the same thing every year, and then go back to Tokyo to conduct his business, and then he goes down 3 days later to Nagasaki to do the same thing there. So thousands of people attend these,
Okay.
including hibakusha and family members. There's like choirs of school children and orchestras playing. It's a big thing. So when before COVID-19, I was able to participate in 8 of those,
Oh my goodness.
4 each in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So
Well, and I know there's an incredible museum in Hiroshima. I've had the opportunity to go there. Is there a museum in Nagasaki?
there is,
Okay,
yes,
I haven't been.
yes.
Okay, so we should
It's
all
the one in
visit.
Nagasaki is a bit more strident in the anti-nuclear messaging.
Okay,
The Hiroshima one is more historical. The Nagasaki one
right.
maybe a bit more political, you could say.
Okay.
Both worth visiting, definitely.
I guess, the last question I'll ask is how we can all ensure the stories from these survivors do not fall aside as they pass on.
Well, read my books and give them to your children.
Good. Teach this history, right? So
Teach the
people
history.
remember it.
Yes, don't skirt over it. It's not DEI to insist on knowing what happened to our fellow human beings on the ground under those fireballs, because the same thing might happen to us someday if we're not careful. So these are warning stories. It's not like a breastfeeding, mea culpa kind of thing. You don't have to approach the history like that. Approach it as a warning that these bombs can never be used again.
Well, MG, thank you so much for the work that you've done, for your devotion to documenting this important history, and for being with us from across the world to share it with us. And we're very grateful, and we need to all run out and get your books. Thank you. And everyone who's joined us tonight, thank you so much for being with us. We look forward to having you at other programs soon. MG, we appreciate you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank
Goodbye.
you.